Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this narration of the web series Beyond the Void, the sequel to Why Humans Avoid War. Although this is a standalone book, it also contains characters and the universe from the previous book. The story was taken from Reddit, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. Beyond the Void, Chapter 1. Patrols along any major warp routes were typically uneventful, which was part of the posting's appeal. Receiving generous pay and military benefits to float around in a cruiser, admiring starscapes, was a good deal in my book. Our rare bouts of excitement were the occasional warp drive malfunction or medical emergency, neither of which imbued a sense of danger. The Federation's presence was enough to persuade criminal sects to steer clear of the main access points. More often than not, smugglers hauled their goods through backwater systems and paid off local authorities to turn a blind eye. Pirates usually targeted ships departing from mining outposts, since that was simpler than knocking a ship out of hyperspace. Few would dare to flout galactic law under the watchful eye of a patrol. That is why, when my partner Joffy picked up a distress signal in an unpopulated system, we weren't expecting anything out of the ordinary. A mundane mechanical failure, perhaps, or a reckless teenager who had taken a ship for a joyride. Following standard procedure, I hailed the ship as we came into comms range. "Unknown vessel, please state the nature of your emergency." Silence was the only response I received, which made me uneasy. Most pilots were all too quick to respond to their rescuers and beg for help. Maybe their communications were offline, or perhaps they didn't speak Galactic Common. Whatever the case, it gave me an inkling that this was no standard response call. "Is this another prank? I swear I'm going to kill those kids," Joffy growled. My whiskers twitched at the memory of Joffy using Lavtat leaves to banish ghosts from an empty cargo ship. Some local internet pranksters had rigged the ship to play pre-recorded groaning noises and flip the lights on and off at random intervals. Then they abandoned it and waited for someone to find it. 15 million views later, the rest is history. "I hope that is all. Got a bad feeling about this," I muttered. Joffy stared at the inky blackness ahead, a determined look on her face. "Well, we'll know soon enough. Ship will be in view in a few minutes." Before the vessel was even visible, our data display lit up with bizarre windings. Strange energy readings emanating through the subspace field, like someone had detonated their drive mid-warp. How could anyone have survived such an incident to send out a distress signal in the first place? Our sensors homed in on the target, magnifying the image on screen. It was obvious from the first glance that this was no civilian craft. The vessel was a behemoth, with an angular shape that seemed designed to take a beating. My eye was drawn to the plasma cannon on the hull, which was glowing as though it was powered up. As my gaze turned to the hull, I saw a golden landmass emblazoned on the blue plating. Several curses slipped through my mouth. "By the ancestors! That symbol! That's a Terran ship!" Joffy's head snapped in my direction. "What? Okay, time to hightail it out of here. Buckle up." "Wait, hold on. We can't just leave them," I protested, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "Like it or not, the humans are Federation members, and as entitled to help as anyone else." "I'm not racist, Gorsh, you know that, but that is no civilian ship," she pleaded. "There's two possibilities. The first is that they were testing something dangerous, or that this is a trap." "You think this is a trap?" "Think about it. Ship isn't answering us, and its weapons are powered on. For all we know, they could be human pirates luring us in." "Pirates this close to patrol routes?" "Bold, even for humans. But if anyone would risk it, it is them." I stared through the viewport, where the warship idled in a dead system. It was impossible to refute the logic of Joffy's words. This did have all the markers of a trap. Humans were the most aggressive species in the galaxy, and the last people you wanted to face in close quarters combat. If this was a setup, it wouldn't end well for us. Yet, some idiotic, soft-hearted part of me couldn't bear the idea of leaving a sentient in distress. Even a warlike sentient that could snap us in half with a flick of a wrist. Send a transmission back to Federation Command in case anything happens to us, I said. I'm sorry, Joe. We have to try. An exasperated look crossed her face, but she relayed the message as instructed. Gods, I hate you, gosh. Where is your sense of self-preservation? Gone, I suppose. Suit up. There was some discontented grumbling from Joffy as we clambered into our power armor suits. I knew that their protection would be no match with human weaponry, but they could protect against other perils. They could seal us off from many biohazards and provide us with our own oxygen supply in case the danger was atmospheric. My heart was pounding as I picked up my plasma rifle, unhitching the safety. The ship's computer steered us into a docking port, connecting with an emergency airlock. I thought that I was going to pass out. If anything happens to me, I want you to know that it's your fault, Joffy barked out over the headset. I chuckled. You always know how to make me feel better, Joe. I promise. I'll be crippled by guilt forever. Good. In that case, I am ready to die. She pulled the lever to open the airlock, and I braced myself for a fight on the other side. However, as the door swung open, it revealed nothing but an empty tunnel. There were no humans lying in wait, which at least meant it wasn't a trap. I took a few tentative steps down the corridor and nearly slipped on the slick floor. A glance around revealed a healthy coating of frost on all surfaces, as though the ship had been buffeted by a snowstorm. It was inexplicable. What the hell? Joffy sounded as bewildered as I felt. What happened here? My gaze swept around the room, searching for clues. I don't know, but humans can't survive in temperatures this cold for long. We need to look for survivors. With careful steps, I inched down the edge of the hallway, peering around a corner. A scream escaped my lips, and horror shot through my veins at the ghastly sight before us. The room, which appeared to be a mess hall, was littered with human corpses. Many of them had been killed in ways which, before today, I would have said were impossible. Several bodies seemed to have fused with objects, their faces frozen in an eternal expression of terror. One man, whose torso was sunken into a wall, appeared to be mid-scream, the bulging eyes, mouth agape, hands outstretched. It took every ounce of my willpower to not flee from the ship then and there. What were the humans messing with? Gosh, are you seeing this? Joffy asked. Seeing, but still working on believing, I replied. She was kneeling by a body on the floor, checking it for vitals. This one, I thought it might be alive. Seems to be the only one not crafted to the structure. Any heartbeat? No. It's very much dead. There's a stream of blood from the eye sockets. My guess, the eyes burst, and so did most of the other organs. Ugh! I don't think we'll find any survivors, Joe. Me neither. Let's get out of here before whatever happened to them happens to us. Wait. We need to get the data off the ship's computer first, if we want to figure out what happened. This is why, over our heads, gosh. I'm not risking my life for a damn ship log. It's not about the log. What if something attacked them, and it's still out there? All of us could be in danger. Look, just a quick trip to the bridge, then we can leave. There were no further protests, and as far as I was concerned, that was assent. The bridge was likely the center of the ship, since that was Terran preference. So we just needed to continue inward. The two of us maneuvered through several rooms, ignoring the grisly scenes laid out before us. If I stopped to dwell on each of them, I don't think I could have carried on. It only took a few minutes to reach the bridge, but by the time we arrived, I felt like I had aged a decade. The images of body parts and blood-soaked walls were burned into my mind, lodged there for all eternity. The command center was as gory as any of the other sectors. Many of the human officers had merged with their workstations, and the others were in a pile of blood on the floor. I pushed down another scream, trying to focus on the task at hand. The ship's data needed to be retrieved. Once that was achieved, we could get as far away from here as possible. The holo display at the heart of the bridge seemed to be the best station to pull the data from. I walked over to it, careful to step over the corpses slumped in front of it. My hand waved over its sensors, hoping to wake it. Access denied, an automated voice declared, scaring me half to death. Biometric authorization required. There was a handprint reader in front of the holodisplay, which was probably what the computer wanted. With a grimace, I rolled over the body on my feet. It was difficult not to retch hauling the pallid carcass, but I tried my best. The idea of vomit rolling around in my visor did not appeal to me in the slightest. I dragged the dead fellow's hand on top of the reader, unlocking the display. After swiping through several tabs, I found the option to transfer all ship data, and selected our cruiser as the recipient. Thank the stars, we were almost out of this mess. While waiting for the upload to complete, my gaze flitted down towards the body I had utilized. The scar across the right cheek and the missing eyes were new, but I recognized the face anyways. Crap, Joe! This isn't just any human ship. I paused, drawing a shaky breath. We need to send word to home immediately. What? Did you find something? She asked. I pointed to the body at my feet. This guy here is a Federation top general. I don't know what's going on, but we might be at war. Whatever had killed these humans, we needed to figure out what it was. Quickly. End of chapter. Chapter 2. Gauche Point of View. When the humans took over the military following the infamous Nova War, they moved our commanding facility off-world, switching the location every half cycle. Their stated reasoning was to avoid something called a decapitation strike, whatever that meant. At the present time, we were stationed on an asteroid in an unoccupied system. The living facilities were fully enclosed in a dome to render the air breathable. Throw in the help of artificial gravity, and you could forget that you weren't on a proper planet. The Federation's computer technicians started dissecting the data as soon as we arrived at military headquarters. Jofi and I remained in the room while waiting for the techs to finish the analysis, in case they needed to ask us any further questions. We had already endured a thorough interrogation, which was conducted by a panel of officers. As far as I was concerned, there wasn't anything left to tell. I was relieved that we would get to listen to the initial findings and hopefully receive some answers. Nothing about this fit together. For one thing, it struck me as odd that none of those present were humans, given that it was their ship we discovered. It seemed that I wasn't alone in noticing that fact. General Blez of the Jutari Confederacy was growing increasingly irritated at the Terran's absence, as evidenced by his stiff body language. Sir, Gallo, a young Hodal analyst, spoke up with hesitancy. Undoubtedly, he noticed his superior's ill-tempered demeanor too. We finished a file restoration and created a summary of our findings. I hope you'll be satisfied with our performance. The Jutari General and Tenai nodded together with a nod. Yes, you've done your job, but tell me, where are the damned Hewitts? I don't know. They said that they're standing someone, Qualla replied. General Blaze glowered at the technician. It's been several hours. What could possibly be the delay? I asked them the same thing, sir. They said that they're sending someone from Earth, and they needed to pull him out of a meeting. Quallo, how many humans are on this fucking base? Approximately 15,000, sir. Why can't they send one of them? Because I believe you're looking for me. A gravelly voice answered from the back of the room. Rumors of my demise have been greatly exaggerated. A chill ran down my spine as I turned towards the newcomer and found myself face to face with a dead man. It was General Rykov, leader of the Federation's military, in the flesh. The same human whose corpse I dragged across the bloody floor this very morning. His cheek was unblemished by the scar I'd seen earlier, and his eyes were still intact. A squeal escaped my throat, and acting on impulse, I dove under the table to hide. Sure, my response wasn't exactly befitting of a soldier, but it wasn't every day that we witnessed a resurrection. This couldn't be happening. This had to be a nightmare that I would wake up from, and then I would laugh at it absurdly. Even the cantankerous General Blaze seemed dumbfounded. You're dead? Honestly, I've gotten about 15 calls asking if I'm all right, and it's getting old. Rykov flopped down on a chair, kicking his feet up on the table. Whoever you found, it wasn't me. I clawed my way from my hiding spot, trying to calm myself. There hadn't been a doubt in my mind on the deceased's identity, but maybe I'd made a mistake. Trauma could do strange things to people's minds after all. Are you sure? Kello asked, voice fraught with terror. The technician displayed an image on the projector, which was taken by Federation investigators. The blood drained from Rykov's face as he locked eyes with his own mangled corpse. It was unmistakably his visage on screen. The human sprang from his seat, shaking his head. The poor guy looked like he was about to have a panic attack. And honestly, I couldn't blame him. If someone showed me my dead body, with blood streaming from my orifices, I'd be freaked out too. Rykov took a deep breath, running a hand through his silky brown hair. Okay, tell me everything. Gallo hesitated. Well, most of the files were corrupted beyond repair. We were only able to salvage a small snippet of a log entry. One clip, that's it, the human growled. I'm sorry, sir. Believe me, I wish I had more to go on, but we might well take a look. The Hodal technician switched to the video, which was overlaid by a dreadful crackling sound. The picture was muted, like the lens was fogged up. Its words were distorted almost beyond recognition, and were unintelligible in several instances. But I recognized the face and the voice of the human general, and he seemed furious. We're all screwed if, what was stolen? Home! We're in pursuit of the cargo freighter Pisces, before the bastard The tape faded to darkness, leaving us to consider what had occurred. My interpretation was that this Pisces ship was transporting some stolen goods, and the Terrans were trying to track them down. Perhaps that would be a good lead to start with. General Rykov frowned as it had deepened. Do you have a timestamp on that log? Pardon, in human time, it says 5:43 p.m., Quado answered. No, the date. Stardate. That must be wrong. It says 13.152. Which is 5 days from now. I see. This entire ordeal was making my head hurt. Did the evidence actually suggest that this doomed vessel was from the future? It sounded preposterous, but then again, so did a man coming back from the dead. The Terrans did love to meddle with things that were beyond their control. Maybe this time, it had finally caught up with them. You guys can time travel. The words slipped out of my mouth before I could stop them. Since when? Rykov sighed. I don't think we've done it yet. I know of one project, but it's in its infancy. There were no plans for an actual test yet. This project? Talk. Thing is, humans have made some mistakes we'd like to correct. Mistakes was a generous word, and I knew he meant the genocide that had committed during the war. Some in our government are believers in the multiverse theory. They were building a gate to another reality. Whether that's by finding a parallel timeline or creating a cosmic undo button, they don't care. Les fixed the human with an irate look. Of course, your kind all thought punching a hole to another dimension was a great idea. What could go wrong? It is a great idea. Look, if you can go beyond the flow of time and space as we know it, you can change history. You always have a way to turn back the clocks, or a new realm to run to when the shit hits the fan. Ultimately, the lessons we learned today is it works. I gawked at Rykov, unable to believe the words I was hearing. You're supposed to die in 5 days, give or take. And you're chalking this up as a win. 2 possibilities exist. Either the timeline is fixed and trying to change it is futile, or the events can be changed. In that case, I'll just steer clear of any portals and we'll prevent the whole thing. Prevent it? Les repeated. How can we help? I say we track down the Pisces. As good a place as any to start. The human clasped his hands behind his back, surveying the room. His gaze locked with mine for a moment, and he offered a slight smile. This is going to be dangerous, I won't lie. If any of you want out, now is the chance to leave. I'll understand. I shot a glance at Jofi, who, like most in the room, had remained silent throughout the proceedings. There was a wordless exchange that passed between us. Her eyes narrowed as she realized I intended to stay. If it was possible to prevent the atrocious disaster, I had to be involved. Putting our awful discovery out of mind and returning to business as normal seemed impossible. If I didn't take action, the memories would consume my every thought. No creature deserved such a gruesome fate. Certainly not for the crime of curiosity. Despite her disapproval, I knew that Jofi would stick with me to the end. We were in this together. None of the individuals present for the briefing budged. General Rykov seemed heartened by the support and gave an appreciative nod. "All right then, let's get to work." End of chapter. Larkan point of view. Nico looked like a lost tourist, slinking around behind the temple, but, as with all humans, appearance could be deceiving. If you wanted an item stolen, this was the guy you asked. There was no job too dangerous for the right price. Call it arrogance or well-placed confidence. But the man believed that he could crack any system. Sometimes he would snatch an item on a whim, just for the thrill. Fencing contraband, primarily human weaponry, provided him with ample revenue and considerable influence. As for the authorities, Nico lined the right pockets that allowed him to dodge port inspections, move cargo freely about the outer rim systems, and stay one step ahead of the investigators. I'd served the human for years, acting as his right-hand man. Sometimes that was as pilot, as messenger, as a bodyguard. Whatever was asked of me, I obliged. Today, my role was to be his lookout, the eyes and ears for his latest operation. But the current target, a temple of the Kovian species, did not sit well with my conscience. It represented the predominant faith of my homeworld, and while I was hardly devout, I still clung to the core of our beliefs. Toying with the religious institution seemed to be tempting fate. It was the kind of irreverent action that merited divine punishment. It was no wonder that Nico was the only thief willing to accept this contract. "Boss," I hissed, "are you sure that this is a good idea?" "What, got cold feet?" Nico snickered, waving a hand dismissively. "This is a simple break-in. It'll do fine." "Simple, sure, but you're stealing from a temple," I replied. "What if you anger the gods? Men have been cursed for less." The human sighed, rolling his eyes. "I don't believe in sky daddies. Fairy tales for children, Larkin. Look, all you have to do is sit there for a few minutes and watch for trouble. Can you do that?" A growl hummed in my throat. His condescending tone rubbed me the wrong way. "Fine, but you're making a terrible mistake." Nico had scoped out the scene during the day and used his findings to draw up a plan. The doors were wired with an alarm system that would alert police if not disarmed in 10 seconds. The priests of the Kovian pantheon figured that would be enough time to deter any intruders from snatching their relics, but clearly they had never met a human. My thieving friend's plan was to scale several stories up to the glass rooftop, bust a hole in it, and then rappel down into the gallery. Once he had the package, he intended to stroll out the front door and be long gone before the authorities showed up. I was nauseated just watching him shimmy up the rusting pipe on the roof. There was nothing stopping him from falling to the ground and becoming a splat on the stone pavement. If his grip faltered for a moment, all the support gave out under his weight. Before long, Nico reached the top and shot me a thumbs up, grinning like the perilous climb was nothing. He hooked the other end of the harness's rope around the crumbling spire, which rested at the center of the glass dome. I was not convinced that the structure would support his weight, but I doubted he gave his safety a second thought. Nico drew his pistol and fired several shots through the fragile ceiling. As the glass shattered beneath his feet, he began his descent. The spire was all that kept him tethered overhead, and it was cracking like a tree that was about to topple. It began to tilt in Nico's direction, and I feared that it might snap at any second. To make matters worse, the exterior lights of the building flashed on, and the shriek of an alarm permeated the air. So much for a wired door being the only defense mechanism. There must have been some sort of motion sensors inside, activated by his entry. Police drones would be dispatched now, and hovercraft officers would follow shortly on their heels. We needed to flee immediately, before it was too late. The spire had not given out, and I supposed that by this point, Nico had touched down safely. Surely, it would abandon the mission, and we would make a break for it. His species was insane, but I was pretty sure they had no desire to go to prison. But the seconds stretched into minutes, and there was no sign of Nico. The curly-haired human must have been in no rush to evacuate, and the buzz of drones was growing louder. Perhaps something had gone wrong. It seemed I had no choice but to leave him, if I wanted to save my skin. My eyes darted around, searching for the best escape route. At that time, the thief burst out through the front door, clutching a miniature statue to his chest. The ceramic figurine looked unimpressive, but an anonymous buyer had offered us some upward of 500,000 credits for its retrieval. I ran up to him, jabbing a claw in his face. "Are you crazy? You should have left the damn thing. We're busted." "And leave empty-handed," the human quipped. "Follow me. I know a shortcut back to the canals." "It's too late. See those drones?" I pointed to a pair of discs about 100 paces to our left. "They spot us already, and they have thermal cameras. You won't lose them. I told you this mission was cursed." "Do you trust me, Larkin?" He frowned as I fervently shook my head. "Whatever. Run like your life depends on it." Nico tore off down the alleyway, and I chased after him, my spindly legs struggling to keep up with the persistent predator. My lungs were burning after only a few strides. The drone zipped after us, closing the distance. We passed over heaps of garbage and empty shipping crates that had been left out on the street. The pungent scent of rot was enough to choke my senses. The human was fortunate enough to have a weak sense of smell. A chain-like fence blocked the end of the alleyway, cutting off our escape. It was only nearly twice the human's height, but he didn't skip a beat. He mounted it in a single leap and vaulted over to the other side with ease. It was only then that he glanced back, checking on my progress. I reached the base of the barricade, doubled over from exhaustion. My species had evolved with an aptitude for burrowing into the ground, not climbing. There was no way that I was going to make it over that fence. Nico climbed back up, reaching a hand over the top. "Take my hand. I'll pull you over." "Go!" I panted. I'm done." The human muttered several curses in his native tongue, then, despite my protest, hoisted me over the fence. I collapsed on the ground, pressing my paw to my side. Instead of abandoning me, like any sane species would do, Nico drew his pistol and fired on the drones. The kinetic rounds bounced harmlessly off their metal armor. It only seemed to anger them. Now they had been attacked. Their programming gave them clearance to engage with lethal force. Nico drove behind a dumpster, and not a moment later, a laser scorched the ground where he had been standing. By the gods, he was going to get himself killed. A police hovercraft glided into the alley, parking itself between us and the exit. The only option now was to surrender, and to hope that the officer would spare us. A young Jatari male stepped out of the cruiser, wielding a universal remote in his hand. Inexplicably, he pressed a button and powered down the drones. Why would the officer disable the best weapons against an armed, hostile human? Nico might have a chance in a shootout with a single patrolman. "What have you done this time? Get in the vehicle before I change my mind," the Jatari muttered. To my surprise, Nico lowered his weapon. "Ben, long time no see." The human boarded the hovercraft, and I hastily crawled after him. He seemed to know the Sven guy, so perhaps the cop was on his payroll. Wherever we traveled, corruption was never difficult to uncover. It was an attribute that thrived in positions of power. Officer Fenn settled behind the controls, but seemed to be in no hurry to take off. His body language suggested that he was waiting for something, as did the expectant look he threw at Nico. "Of course." My Terran friend fished out his holopad, tapping a few buttons. "There you go, 50,000 credits wired to your account." The officer feigned disbelief. 50,000, that's it. Don't be ridiculous. A 10% cut for a 2-minute ride is more than fair. I want 100. No way, Finn. Don't get greedy now. Well, if it's too much, I suppose I could just take you to the clink. Fine. I'll give you 50 now and 50 when you drop us off. No. Full payment now, or we just sit here and wait for my buddies to show up. Your choice, Nico. Bastard. There, I sent another 50. Let's go. Drop us off by the bar. Officer Fenn chuckled. Then the hovercraft revved to life. As we floated off the ground, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd gotten away too easily. My intuition told me that fate had a terrible punishment in store for us. Something much worse than prison. End of story. Chapter 4. Larkan Point of View. The tavern was an isolated shack by the canals of Cover 9, which had fallen into disrepair years ago. The upholstery on the bar stools was torn and frayed, the dingy blue-grey paint was peeling, and the tile floor was stained an off-shade yellow. The bar was owned by Nico, and it was a rare source of income that you could write off as legal. Despite the venue's pitiful appearance, it was never lacking for patrons. For a supposedly above-board operation, there was a lot of gambling and illicit drug usage. I think many of the bar's frequent visitors were addicted to the roulette game. They lost heaps of credits, and yet they returned like clockwork. It was a good place to conduct meetings, and was where we had arranged to pass off the statue. Our buyer would transfer the credits, enjoy a few complimentary drinks, and then we would part ways. I was overjoyed at the thought of putting the sacrilegious job behind us. We headed to a booth near the back of the building, where 3 Xanac males were already seated. A sinking feeling crossed my stomach as we settled down across from them. I couldn't help but notice the 3 crescents branded into their feathers, the symbol for the expanding Nationalist Party. Their species carried a particular hatred for humans, ever since the Terran government foiled their plans to conquer the Federation. The way they were looking at Nico, they looked angry, hungry even. If you ask me, they were contemplating the fastest way to dissect the primate. A grey-feathered male, who seemed to be the posse's leader, wraggled the talon towards us.
"The statue. Hand it over."
"Not so fast, Seal," Nico growled. "I want my payment, in full, before I move an inch. 500K, just like we agreed." Seal raised a plasma pistol and aligned it with the human's head. His 2 companions followed his lead, and before I could process what was happening, we were in a wrong side of a 3 guns. I raised my paws in surrender and took a submissive posture. It took all my willpower to not bolt on the spot. Every instinct told me to flee from imminent threat.
"I am not putting a centi-credit into a Terran's pocket,"
the Xanac sneered.
"Give me the statue, or I will take it off your dead body."
The human chuckled, as though he found something amusing about the entire situation. He waved the statue at the 3 Xanac, then tossed it towards them. Xanac talons were not suited for catching items, but Seal lunged for the figurine anyways, dropping his gun in the process. The statue predictably slipped out of his grasp and shattered on the floor with a high-pitched crunch. Nico used a brief distraction to his advantage and unholstered his own pistol before I could blink. He picked off Seal's 2 henchmen with quick shots, racing into the foreheads with mechanical precision. The human whirled towards the disarmed leader, baring his teeth in a predatory grin. "That is why," Nico pressed the barrel against Seal's skull, ignoring the panicked scream from the other customers. "If you draw a gun on a human, you better fucking pull the trigger." There was a deafening crack, and the Xanac slumped against the booth in a pool of his own blood. The poor fella barely knew what had hit him. I stared at the ceramic shards in horror. That was a sacred relic." 3 people were just shot in front of you, and your friend is more worried about the statue. "I like this one," a smooth voice said from the nearest table. I glanced over to see a human male, watching us with a whimsical smirk. Between the neatly groomed black hair, leather briefcase, and tailored suit, he had the look of a financier or a politician. He seemed unfazed by the dead bodies, but he could just be drunk. Perhaps a Terran tourist who wandered into the wrong establishment. "Nobody asked you what you thought. Mind your own damn business," Nico snapped. The man only nodded and sipped at his beer. "The name is Lionel Richards. We've been watching you for a while, Nicholas Marino." My friend stiffened. "What is this? Are you a cop?" "I am with the government, but I am no cop. My business is not so official, if you catch my drift," he replied. Nico frowned. "You're one of the spooks. Bingo. Is Lionel Richards even your real name? What's in a name, anyways? Does it matter?" I did not follow what the 2 humans were discussing, but I did notice how Nico's cocky demeanor had faltered. Whatever hidden meaning Lionel had conveyed, it was enough to concern a seasoned Terran criminal. That probably meant that I should be worried as well. A hint of fear flashed in Nico's eyes as he studied the newcomer. "What do you want, Lionel? Are you here to arrest me? course not. If we wanted to bring you in, we would have done so a long time ago, Lionel answered. We have a proposition for you. A job. And you think I'll do it out of patriotism? No. I thought you could be, persuaded. 5 million credits up front, 20 million when the job is finished. I gaped at the mysterious stranger, certain that I'd misheard. Nobody offered that kind of money in our line of work. That was at least 5 times the going rate for high-value targets. Wow. Consider me persuaded? I'm all ears, Nico said. Lionel nodded. Right. So the target is a clandestine Jatari military base. It is a mere 400 parsecs from this colony, and of course, we'll mark it on your star chart. And what is it that you want stolen? That's the thing, we don't know. We only were made aware of this facility's existence 5 days ago. Our sensors picked up massive energy surges in the region, and upon closer inspection, we noticed a large amount of Jatari ships buzzing about. Our guess, they're running some sort of weapons testing. Lionel, I hope you have a more specific target than that. If the game plan is rolling up to a test site and making off with a bomb, nah, the brass just wants answers. The Jatari have regular transports once a day to a secondary outpost. We'll give you the time and the place. You can figure out the rest. Whatever they're carrying on board, you bring it to us. Sounds like a simple hacking job. Why wouldn't you just do it yourself? Isn't that obvious? If we get caught, it's an act of war. If you get caught, it's piracy. I see. So then, you'll take the job gladly. Send everything over and we'll get started at once. Very well. You'll have your payment tonight. Lionel Richards downed the last of his beer, then slammed his glass on the table. But just to be clear, if you feck with us, it'll be the last thing you ever do. Have a good night, gents. I watched in a dazed stupor as our benefactor collected his belongings and stood up from his station. 25 million credits was a fortune. This was the sort of job that could kickstart an early retirement and fund a lavish lifestyle. In other words, this was a break that we needed to disappear for good. But while Nico had been quick to dismiss our task as a simple hijacking, I knew that it was much more complex. A military transport was unlikely to surrender without a fight, and to further complicate matters, the nature of the cargo was unknown. For all we knew, a direct assault could ignite whatever ammunition that they were carrying. And while we never questioned our contractors' motives, I couldn't help but wonder what the Terrans hoped to find. After years of consorting with their kind, I knew better than most how quickly they could snap. If human suspicions morphed into something more concrete, our little adventure could be the prelude to galactic war. End of chapter. Chapter 5. Gauche Point of View. A strange sense of déjà vu gripped me as we were granted a tour of the procured Terran vessel. I couldn't help but imagine a chill in the air and envision a scene of death that we witnessed not a day prior. The thought that we might share the fate crossed my mind. Sure, there had not been many non-humans on board the ship when we found it, but that hardly meant that we were safe. Either the tragedy could expand to include a Federation's team, or perhaps we'd been amongst the dead already. Whatever caused the crew to perish could have vaporized everyone but the humans for some unknown reason. As General Rykov showed us our quarters, a wave of exhaustion flooded through my body. I realized that I hadn't slept or eaten since our dreadful find. My mind wanted nothing more than to rinse away the horrors of the day. It was all I could do to collapse on a bed and then and there. With only 5 days to prevent a calamity, how could I worry about myself? My eyes must have given away my desire because Rykov pulled me aside as the others entered the bridge. Joffe gave me a worried look. She didn't like the idea of a Terran officer cornering me, and to be fair, neither did I. The thought of being alone with a human was terrifying. They were known to be violent and temperamental. No doubt he would scold me if I showed a hint of weakness. I straightened and tried to look alert, but panic was already rising in my chest. This was much different than our previous meeting, when I was surrounded by Federation officers. Maybe Rykov was angry that I spoke out during the briefing, or perhaps he blamed me for his eventual fate. "Gosh, is it?" The one who found the, accident. The general had turned his attention to the compact machine, inserting a small carton into its top. He placed a cup under it, so I assumed that it was a beverage dispenser. How are you holding up? I'm fine, sir, I replied. I apologize if I gave any impression of weakness. He knitted his eyebrows together. There is no need to be nervous. Oh dear. You're shaking. Afraid of humans, I'm guessing. But, I gasped in horror. He was much too close to the truth. It shouldn't have been that obvious. No, I just mean... Rykov raised a hand to stop me. It's okay. I'm used to it. Look, what you saw would be traumatic for anyone. I don't think you're weak for having an emotional response. If you want to talk about it... I hesitated. Opening up to a human seemed like a bad idea, but the concern in his voice sounded genuine. If anyone should be traumatized, it's, you. You're the one who'll die. How can you carry on like nothing happened? Sometimes it's easier to bottle up your feelings. Safer even, he sighed. Doesn't mean it's healthy. Believe me, I'm as frightened as anyone. But I have to consider crew morale. Who would follow a man who's shaking in his boots? Doesn't exactly inspire confidence. I understand, sir. With leadership comes great responsibility. Indeed. So tell me, honestly, how are you feeling? Permission to speak freely, sir? Of course. I lugged your corpse across the bridge earlier today. Every time I look at you, it brings my mind back to, that. I'm confused, tired, and sick to my stomach. General Rykov nodded, retrieving the now full cup from his drink machine. Drink this. Tastes like crap, but it'll help you with the tired part. I studied the mug with skeptical eyes. The steaming brown liquid was the color of dirt, and its strong, earthy smell didn't help with that association. Not wanting to offend the human, I took a small sip despite my misgivings. A bitter taste overwhelmed my senses, and it took all of my willpower to swallow it down. The human laughed, seeing the disgusted look on my face. Coffee is not that bad. Down at least half of that, and trust me, you'll feel better. Is that an order? I asked. General Rykov chuckled. I'm afraid so. There was no way I could refuse an order from a superior, unless it was a violation of galactic law. I closed my eyes and poured the scalding liquid down my throat, managing several gulps. I couldn't help but gag as the taste lingered in my mouth. Why would the humans ever consume something so vile? That's enough. The general pried the cup from my grasp and studied me with his rich brown eyes. Gosh, I pulled you aside because, frankly, you look like hell. Are you sure you're up for this? I want to help, sir. More than anything, I replied. Good. In that case, let's join the others. Wait, can I ask you something first? Shoot. Is it true that you humans slaughter each other by the millions for no reason? That's, what people say. But you seem more normal than I expected. Rykov grimaced as though my question caused him pain. We used to. We drew our stupid lines in the sand and thought that our locale made us different from each other. The powerful asked the young to die for them, time and time again, and kept us divided by ideology. What changed? Perspective. Up in space, it was plainly obvious. We were all the same damn rock. I'd be happy to discuss humanity's mistakes at a far greater length, but another time, another place. We need to get moving to the bridge. I mused his words as we descended the stairwell to the command center, while I occasionally crossed paths with humans on base. That was my first interaction with one since the war. There had been nothing aggressive about Rykov's behavior, despite his species' reputation. In fact, he had been more cordial than most officers I had encountered. And after all the fantastical stories about humanity, from the tales of serial killers prowling their streets for amusement to bombs that could eliminate an entire fleet in a single blast, I hadn't expected a Terran to label warfare as idiocy, especially a general who had carved a career out of it. Perhaps human were not as animalistic as the Federation believed. I found Joffe waiting at the holodisplay, fixing the hand scanner with the blank stare. She looked mildly annoyed, but that was the only emotion her expression revealed. Despite her calm appearance, I knew that the stress of the day had taken its toll on her too. She was an expert at masking her feelings under a veil of sarcasm, but that didn't fool me one bit. And, what did he want? Joffy fixed me with an inquisitive look, but there was a hint of worry in her eyes.
A private dance?
Yo, I hissed. That's not funny.
Her whiskers twitched. What? I won't stand for anyone stealing my man.
First off, I am not your man, I protested. You're not even into guys.
So he was making moves in you. You didn't deny it, she said.
No, you're unbelievable. Rykov was just checking up on my mental state. Seemed worried even.
Is he going to throw you off the ship? If he's already worried that you're getting to jeopardize the mission.
It wasn't like that. You're not going to believe this. But I felt like he cared. Truly.
Gosh, I don't mean to sound dismissive, but I doubt a general from a military species cares about your problems. Humans are always looking for an angle.
You need to stop thinking of them as friends and see them as dangerous allies.
But he said it doesn't matter what he said. Your words are easy. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here for you, okay? You know that.
I lowered my head, feeling my fur prickle with embarrassment. As much as I wanted to argue, Joffy was right. Only a gullible fool would be disarmed by a few sympathetic words. If my goal was to accompany this mission, then giving its human leader cause for concern was the last thing I should do. All right, everyone, listen up. General Rykov's voice thundered through the room, silencing any straight chatter. We dug up the Pisces registration, and it appears to be an ordinary transport for holodesk posts. That said, knowing what we know, you should stay vigilant. You are authorized to use whatever force you deem fit, but only if we are attacked first. According to its transponder, it is currently docked in a small Covian colony, which is where we're landing in a few minutes. The plan is to seize the ship, track down its owners, and make sure that they never go for the little joyride in 5 days. Any questions? The General answered by silence. Even General Blez, the disagreeable chief officer of the Jatari, had no objections to the proposal. It seemed like a straightforward plan to prevent the vessel from moving stolen goods in the first place. Good! I just want to say I appreciate the Federation's support more than you know. Here's a welcome change. Rykov plotted the course of the descent. The ship altered its trajectory with a droning hum. Let's rewrite history. End of chapter. Chapter 6. Gauche Point of View. In major points of commerce and tourism, docking stations stretched as far as the eye could see, with entire cities built around them to accommodate travelers. By comparison, the cavernous hangar on Cova 9 was rather modest. An unwitting passerby might mistake it for a warehouse. The port's main occupants were cargo freighters on their regular supply runs, and the occasional charter craft. The only visitor came to see family, and they usually didn't stay long. Nobody wanted to stay on a poor, shrinking colony unless they had nowhere else to go. The 3 Covian custom officers looked up surprised to see a military vessel, armed to the teeth with weapons, descending into their little port. I expected more terror at the sight of a human warship, but I suppose these people realized their planet was too meager of a prize to appeal to the Earthlings. As we prepared to disembark, I considered leaving my gun behind. It would be a nuisance to lug a heavy rifle around. This trio didn't seem like they would pose any trouble to our party. I began to place the rifle back onto the weapons cart, but Joffy pushed it back into my paws. "You're an idiot, gosh," she growled. "A bunch of humans got mauled chasing this ship, and you want to run up to it defenseless. It's sitting in a tiny idle port. It's days before the disaster." I gestured out the viewport towards the customs officers on the ground. "I count 3 of them, and about 100 of us. What's the worst that could happen?" She glared at me. "You've already seen the worst that can happen, but you do what you want." With a sigh, I hoisted my rifle back onto my shoulders. My senses had heightened, and my exhaustion had faded. But there was also an unusual agitation steering my thoughts. I felt invincible, ready to run 1,000 clicks, with the newfound energy surging through my veins. I felt alive. Perhaps the brown drink Rykov gave me had been drugged. Now that I considered it, he had all but admitted that it was some sort of mind-altering substance. The dark-haired human was standing by the airlock, looking rather displeased with General Blez. That did not bode well for our team's cooperation. Bickering between the galaxy's 2 most aggressive species could easily end in violence. General Rykov's voice was low, but with my species-sharp hearing, I was able to make out the words. "Then why exactly are you in charge? Last time I checked, I outranked you."
The Covian government is less than thrilled with the Terran warship landing on their territory, Blaise answered. They're worried that you might leave a trail of bodies in your wake. They think that you're on another, crusade?
Another crusade? When have we ever attacked the Federation? There was a hint of anger in Rykov's voice, and I noticed him clenching his fists. We have never raised a finger against you. Lord knows we could have.
I beg to differ. There are several instances that come to mind,
like
Kylon.
The human recoiled as though he had been slapped. Clearly, there was a subtext that I did not understand. General Kylon had been Rykov's predecessor, a Jatari officer who was killed in action during the war. The venom in Blaise's voice suggested that he blamed the Terrans for his comrade's death, or he believed something more nefarious was afoot. How dare you? Rykov spat. You have no idea what you're talking about.
I was his first officer. I know plenty. Blaise's antenna twisted together, as though he was trying to calm himself. Look, I'm trying to help you. Announcing yourself as Terran military won't open a lot of doors, whereas the Jatari were respected. Just for once, let me do the talking.
Before the human could offer any protest, Blaise pulled the door handle and started down the landing ramp. After a brief moment of hesitation, Rykov followed, with the rest of our entourage in tow. The customs officers at the bottom barely looked up from her holopad, despite the presence of 50 armed personnel. Again, her lack of emotion struck me as odd, as did the fact that her partners had vanished.
Greetings, I am Skatali. Please state your nature of your visit.
Military business. We're here to confiscate a Terran ship under the name Pisces, Blaise said.
For what reason? Skatali said.
Not your concern. Take us there now, or you'll be an enemy of the Jatari.
Do you have a warrant? You can't.
Blaise waved a pistol at her, pressing it against her neck. Here's my warrant. Move! The Jatari general's brutish methods sickened me. No civilized soldier would resort to threats and bullying without any provocation. Here was the proof that the aggressive species were only as good as their reputation, right in front of me. I rested the glance at Rykov and noticed that he looked appalled, as I felt. Why would it bother the human? Blaise! Rykov's voice dropped an octave, and it didn't escape my notice that he felt a general's title. Put that weapon down, or I will put you down.
Will you?
There was a click as the human removed the safety on his gun. Last warning. This is not how we treat civilians under my command. With a furious snarl, Blaise lowered his weapon and turned all three eyes towards Rykov. If looks could have killed, the human would have moved and melted to a puddle, then and there. The Terran general took a deep breath, trying to collect himself. I apologize for my subordinate, Skatali. I'll be having some stern words with him later, I assure you. She nodded, strangely unperturbed.
It's all right. As I was saying, do you have a warrant? By law, I can't allow you to inspect or seize property without it.
I understand. I would never have asked you to break the law if it weren't an emergency. Thousands of lives are at stake. There was no time to go through traditional channels, not without how backlogged your courts are. We do have a direct permission from the Covian government.
Sir, I'm sorry, but the politicians don't have that kind of authority.
You're right. We'll go through the proper steps as soon as we can. But right now we need your help. If we don't get to the ship in time, innocent people will die. Please, I'm begging you.
Well, just this once. Fine. Follow me.
General Rykov nodded his gratitude and followed Skatali towards the cordoned-off hangar at the back of the building. His behavior with her reminded me of the human we used to know, diplomatic, meek, docile. But then he dropped back a bit, falling in at Blaise's side. Then the illusion dissolved. The rage smoldering in his brown eyes was primal. You were worried about me leaving a trail of bodies. You were going to talk. What was that? The human hissed.
Everything was under control until you interfered. I wasn't going to hurt her.
Blaise shook his head, refusing to look at the human.
She wasn't cooperating. All that was needed was a bit of intimidation. You know, remind the rent-a-cops of their place. You can't show weakness like that. That groveling was pathetic, an embarrassment to your kind.
Rykov chuckled. An embarrassment for asking nicely.
Yes, it's a wonder that you ever got such a high rank.
I was thinking the same about you. As worrisome as the thought of fisticuffs breaking out between two officers was, I found myself distracted by other concerns.
the nagging thought lingered at the back of my mind that Scutali had complied a bit too easily. It was as though she had only been stalling for time. Where had her partners gone? Maybe it was just the coffee drugs creating anxiety, but this did not pass the smell test. The customs officer pressed a button to open the hangar. The metal door slowly slid aside. I made out a few dozen silhouettes, crouching in firing positions. The majority of armed forces appeared to be human, which was rather unusual for the middle-of-nowhere colony. Well, that explained where the partners had gone to round up the rest of the crew. Acting on instinct, I tugged Joffrey to the ground. Not a second later, gunfire erupted around us. Blood splattered onto my nose as a plasma round tore through a human soldier in front of me. He dropped to the floor with a sickening thud, splayed out with a burgeoning pool of crimson. Shock pulsed through my chest as I realized how close that was to being me. Around us, several others fell, and more stumbled from non-fatal hits. Our attackers had gotten the drop on us with their ambush. Our surviving troops scrambled for cover, diving behind loose shipping containers and stray objects. Scutali was nowhere to be seen, so I assumed she rejoined her buddies once the fighting broke out. Our enemies noticed a group of Terran soldiers crouched behind a refreshment station and tossed a round object towards them. The humans seemed to recognize the device and scrambled out of the hiding spot. Perhaps it was some sort of tool meant to flush out stowaways, but the tiny ball looked harmless. The device detonated as soon as the thought crossed my mind. Despite its puny size, it unleashed a forceful blast that took down all in its vicinity. Right. Everything with humans involved, explosions. How could I forget? Bits of shrapnel rained out from the epicenter, maiming anyone who lacked shelter. This was a butcher's weapon, intended to inflict pain and suffering. I saw one human crawling away, dragging the blood-soaked remnants of a leg behind her. My knowledge of xenobiology was hazy, but if memory served me right, humans weren't capable of limb regrowth. What did they do with their wounded and impaired? Didn't they have a saying, only the strong survive? Perhaps the Terrans would just leave this one to die, since it was doubtful that she could walk again. Gosh! With a quick glance, I saw Joffrey crawling towards the stout metal container, where Rykov, Blez, and a few other men were waving us over. She seemed to have called my name several times. Are you going to just lay there, watching? Get your ass over here! I wriggled over to the makeshift shelter, propping myself against the cool surface. Rykov and Blez were crouched side by side, quarrel forgotten, returning fire. Facing off against a force that was primarily humans didn't bode well for me. But it was better than sitting back on my paws. I reached for my rifle and peered over the container with my scope. If I was to die on the mission, I might as well go down shooting. End of chapter. Chapter 7. Gorsh's Point of View. The staccato whirring of guns and the concussive bangs of explosives flooded my senses, and I struggled to keep my rifle steady. Engaging a squad of rogue humans was well above my pay grade. I was a patrol agent with only basic training and zero field experience. The primates seemed to move in sync, communicating without words. It was as though the firefight was a choreographed dance that they had rehearsed 1,000 times. When they darted out into the open, they were back under cover before they could target them. The furtive movement seemed designed to distract us, while another contingent encircled us from behind. One cluster of humans were preparing our position with fire, chewing through our metal container bit by bit. If they wanted my attention, then, by stars, they could have it. Staring down the sights of my gun, all I could make out was the outline of their helmets, barely visible behind a barrel. I depressed the trigger, assaulting their shelter with the plasma fire. Their refuge was parked with scorch mark, but the barrel withstood my enraged barrage. Frustration hummed in my chest as my rifle vibrated, indicating that it was on cooldown. The enemy was closing in on us with a methodical ease. It was a matter of time before they crashed through our entrenchments. The Terran soldiers and their few surviving Federation allies had no chance to regroup to get their bearings. As far as I was concerned, the fight was over. I was already playing my death in my head. Perhaps I would be ripped apart by the seams by nasty explosives, mutilated and unrecognizable. The thought had no sooner crossed my mind when an object sailed over the counter, landing behind General Blez. I considered running, as a Terran soldier had done earlier, but then I remembered it hadn't done him any good. General Ikov's eyes widened with alarm, and then, to my utter disbelief, he reached out for the device, and he lost his mind. Quicker than my eye could track, the dark-haired officer hurled the device back in the direction it came from. A few Terran's choruses echoed from above the fray, followed by the sound of a detonation. Hesitantly, I peeked back up above our container. One enemy was crawling through the pool of his own blood, cupping a pale hand to his neck. His other hand was fumbling around, in a blind attempt to find his weapon. I was amazed that anyone could still be conscious after sustaining such injuries, let alone having the presence of mind to fight. I raised my recharged rifle and aimed a shot towards his temple. My breath hitched in my throat. It felt wrong to strike down someone too wounded to fight back, but with how resilient humans were, it was too dangerous to leave an opponent alive. It was merciful, anyways, I told myself, instead of leaving him to bleed out in agony. My claw hooked on the trigger, and the plasma bolt tore through his skull. The light fizzled out from his eyes, and he fell limp to the floor. I'd just killed a man, a permanent, irrevocable action. The guilt that racked my body made me want to curl up in a ball and weep. My mind was spinning, my chest burned, my throat felt like it was constricting. "Breathe, Gosh," Joffy hissed, snapping me out of my daze. "You can have a panic attack later." I took a shaky breath, trying to ground myself. "That's not how that works." "Do you think that you're the only one that's scared?" She fired back with shots over the container, then ducked back down. "It was your idea to get involved with this crap anyways. Now isn't the time to rethink your decisions." "You chose to tag along," I spat back. "I don't know how you can just so be so matter of fact. It's your first time killing someone too." Joffy's eyes darted toward Rykov, and she dropped her voice to a whisper. "First off, they attacked us. Secondly, you killed a human. They're hardly more than animals. I wouldn't sleep over it." I glanced at the Terran general and breathed a sigh of relief as he didn't react. Joffy's disdain for humans was becoming more overt by the minute. "You're lucky he didn't hear you. Maybe you should give them a chance, Gosh. You know I love you, but shut up. Please, just shoot the fecking perps." I sighed, surveying the surroundings once more. One rival was setting up some sort of rocket launcher inside the hangar at the far end of the spaceport. Fires were already raging throughout the terminal. The last thing we needed was more explosives in our section. I unleashed a volley of shots in his direction. From such a long range, my precision was limited, but one plasma bolt did connect with his shoulder. Hopefully, that was enough to disrupt his task. A buzzing noise came from behind me, and I whirled around. Rykov had opened up a large briefcase, which was packed with tiny machines. They almost looked like four-winged insects, but I couldn't see what practical use they would have in battle. General, what is that?" I asked. He fiddled with the joystick, not looking up. "A drone swarm." I squinted in confusion. A what? "A watch and learn," came the amused reply. "When they're down, we're going to attack. Prepare to move." The insectoid contraptions lifted off. They were small enough to fit in my paws. However, after seeing the diminutive ground explosives, I wasn't going to underestimate them. For all I knew, these were some sort of flying localized nukes. The drones homed in on the enemy targets, shelling them with lasers. Our assailants turned their guns towards the sky, diverting their focus from us. The machines then dove towards the ground in unison, signaling out a single target and ramming them from head to toe. Most disintegrated on impact, but there were more standing by to take their place. Rinse and repeat. It was a death by 1,000 stings, clearly. Terran weaponry was not limited to the famed bombs. The drone's victims flailed about like they were on fire, clawing at their eyes. I turned away from the brutal scene, not wanting to watch any longer. But the blood-curdling scream still found their way to my ears. "Soldiers, move in!" Rykov shouted. I rose to my feet on autopilot, tagging behind the general. Could I ever underestimate humans? Sure, drone swarm had been the only thing to turn the tide, but the fact that they dreamed up such brutality, that was the issue. So many people in the Federation defined humanity by their aggressive side, but I believed there was more complex than that. I could have sworn that I saw sadness, compassion even, flash in Rykov's eyes as we passed the wounded comrade. It was all an act. I was buying it, hook, line, and sinker. "A lot of Terran casualties today, I'm sorry for your loss, General," I stammered. Rykov glanced at me, smiling bitterly. "Gosh, they're only human. Hardly more than animals. I wouldn't lose sleep over it. I flinched. Ah, crap. You heard that, every word. Your friend is as subtle as a sledgehammer. I'm sorry. Really sorry. Joffy is just having a bad day. She didn't mean it. Yes, she did. I could see it in her eyes from the first briefing. Then, I've stayed out of her way. But, my God, people don't usually put it so bluntly. She doesn't have much of a filter, sir. The general raised a hand to stop me, leaning over a rival corpse. The body was riddled with wounds, but I thought I saw a rise and fall of chest. Rykov poked him with the butt of his rifle and received a groan in response. If he took one in alive, maybe we could get some answers. We needed to know why they attacked us and what exactly the Pisces was up to. Any nearby personnel, we have a prisoner in need of medical transport at my location. Rykov spoke into his comset and turned to me. Gosh, we're going to do a quick sweep of the hangar bay, but after that, I want you to head back to the ship. You're overdue for some rest. I nodded. Yes, sir. Also, for what it's worth, don't be too hard on yourself. He ran a hand through his brown hair, smoothing the back. First time taking a lifer. Feels like shit. It doesn't get easier. I think you just get more used to the feeling. It does feel like shit, sir. May I ask? I paused, and I gestured for me to go on. Why are you nice to me? Pardon? You pulled me aside, back on the ship. You treat me like a friend, an equal. Why? You remind me of someone. And what became of the someone? In short, they shot the Senate speaker and disappeared. A story for another day. With respect, sir, I don't see this resemblance, sir. He chuckled. No, you wouldn't. We browsed the interior of the hangar bay in silence, delving through crates and computer terminals. I wasn't sure how I gave the general the same impression as an assassin, or why exactly that would lead to a friendly behavior. Perhaps humans had a few loose screws, and it was as simple as that. Mystery solved. Teams of Terran ships were sweeping the ships that remained dormant inside. No doubt that they were trying to identify which one was the Pisces. It didn't look like they needed any help. I meandered over to the back wall, stopping by a chipped door that read emergency exit. Upon closer inspection, there was a thin trail of blood on the floor, which seemed to lead outside. Hesitantly, I pushed the door open. There was a winding dirt road, which carved its way down the grassy knoll. It appeared to lead down to the docks, where I could make out a Kovian male unmooring a boat. I raised my rifle, sprinting down the path. After what we had endured, there was no way that I could just watch the bastard escape. My brain registered a flash of movement as I passed a bulky tree. I turned my head in time to see a wiry human jump out and swing a red, cylindrical object at me. There was a brief thunderclap of pain as I struck behind the ear. Darkness descended on my vision, snuffing out my consciousness in an instant. End of chapter. Chapter 8. Larkin Point of View. Nicker was fuming. To have our spaceport raided by Terran military right after accepting a government contract was a major breach of trust to him. If we had evacuated the premises a second slower, we would be dead or captured right now. We had been about to depart for the clandestine Jatari base when a monstrous warship descended and human soldiers bulldozed their way through our facility. Perhaps that was punching above our weight class to take on a galaxy's most potent military, but the desire for revenge burned in his eyes nonetheless. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about settling the score. Some Federation goons had tagged along with the humans, and one of them had walked into an obvious trap. A plump, shaggy-haired Tajili male was tied up on my couch now, snoozing after a knock to the head. He must have gotten his buttons reset hard, I thought. What we were going to do with him after interrogating him was another question. Dumping his body in the canals was out of the question. Or maybe if he cooperated, we'd release him with a message for his superiors. In all likelihood, the Tajili were following orders and had nothing to do with the Terran government's betrayal. Reasoning with an angry human was difficult, though. Bloodshed might be the only way that they could placate Nico in his current state of mind. After spending an entire afternoon waiting on the captive to wake up, my patience was running thin as well. I decided to take a page from the human playbook and splash the prisoner in the face with a glass of cold water. His tri-colored eyes snapped open, and his gaze darted across the room. I could practically see the gears turning in his head
as it all came rushing back. Finally, you're awake. Undoubtedly, the annoyance dripping from my voice served as an indicator of my foul mood. I walked over to the couch, stooping down to his prone form. Name and rank now. Gosh, patrolman. The Tajili thrashed about for a moment, trying to break the tape around his paws. Realizing it was useless, he slumped back against the cushions. Let me go now, before the Terran military come back looking for me. I'll tell them not to kill you. A mocking laugh escaped my lips. Nice try, but the humans aren't coming for you. Not with that rank. You're nobody. A pawn. Right, they wouldn't leave me, he stammered. That's cute, but even you don't believe that. I can hear it in your voice, I sneered. I have a counter-offer. You tell me everything I want to know, and the human partner might not torture you to death. Ghost shifted nervously. Human partner? Who are you? I asked the questions. What was your mission? I can't tell you that. I leaned in, ensuring that my hot breath was fell over his face. The Tajili flinched, attempting to dissolve into the cushions. This was no seasoned soldier. That much was apparent. The mere mention of torture, the slightest hint of a threat, turned him into a shriveling coward. I figured that the whole of his combat experience had been accrued in the mess hall, fighting for the lost Lbry cake. Really, from my perspective, it doesn't seem that you're in the position to refuse, I hissed. I will not sully the Federation's name by aiding its enemies. To do what you must, Gosh whimpered. I am not your enemy. Listen, I'm trying to help you. I forced a sympathetic look into my face. This guy would squeal under duress, I was certain, but that would squander precious time. The humans have ways of extracting information that are quite painful. Unless you welcome a slow, excruciating stay, I suggest that we do this the easy way. The Tajili hesitated for a moment, no doubt imagining the human torture methods. The Terran's reputation was enough to induce fear in the most hardened individuals. That was the appeal of working with one, post-war. Nobody wanted to get on the violent side of a volatile species with unparalleled creativity. With a little more prodding, my pudgy patrolman would give us everything. Gosh drew a sudden breath. I don't want anyone else to get hurt because of what I say. What are you going to do to me if I tell you? It's simple, Nico's voice answered from behind me, and I nearly jumped out of my fur. The human had entered without my sensing his presence. Who knew how long he'd been lurking? We want to know why the Terran military attacked an agency contractor. Agency? The patrolman repeated. I don't understand. My partner grinned. You don't know then? That Rykov chap really involved you in Feddies without telling you that they were attacking his own people. What do you mean? The hostility flickered in the cautious eyes, replaced by shock. Are you saying that you're with the Terran government? Bingo. The agency is slang for the human intelligence services, always up to some secretive bullshit. What, secretive bullcrap are you up to now? I don't know, you tell me, gosh. Why would they hire us, then sick their dogs on us before we could complete the job? Well, Rykov isn't acting on any directive from Earth. He's just tracking a ship called Pisces. My, what is so special about that ship? There was a terrible accident along my patrol route. An entire crew found dead. The only crew was a log fragment talking about the ship by that name. Then why would the head of Federation Command care? Nico's question parroted the words in my mind. It made no sense that an ordinary transport, which hadn't left its docking port in cycles, would be connected with the ghost ship. It made even less sense that a high-ranking general would take a personal interest in the case. Such minutiae was beneath his office. This was the equivalent of enlisting a brain surgeon to treat a headache. Because Rykov was amongst the dead, Gorsh muttered. It was Nico's turn to look confused. What? That's some crazy nonsense you're spouting. Rykov is very much alive. I saw him in the spaceport. I know. But the corpse we have is definitely him. By every metric, facial recognition, DNA, fingerprints. They can't all be wrong. I'm sorry, are you telling me someone is cloning human generals? No. From what we can tell, his death hasn't happened yet. We're trying to prevent it. So it's all the talk of some psychic, a bad omen and tea leaves. The human laughed incredulously, shaking his head. The general's gone mad then. From the words that you were using, I thought that it was real, tangible. But this is ludicrous. It is real. The Federation conducted a full forensic investigation of the ship. And their findings, yes?
The date logs was from 5 days in the future. Your people are experimenting with some portal. That's all I know. Nico stroked his chin, emerald eyes glowing with excitement. Did the human actually believe that this was a babble? I was starting to think the Gorsh had been clubbed over the head a bit too hard to conjure up such a fantastical delusions. Dead people from the future didn't just materialize out of thin air. Boss, this guy's either yanking your chain or he's nuts, I growled. Nico pulled me aside, lowering his voice. He seems grounded enough, and what's more, his story checks out. They asked for the Pisces by name, according to my people. I guess the agency didn't sell us out after all. So, we just do the job is still on then. What's about this Richards guy? I asked. With some minor changes, depending on what the Jatari are testing, we might keep it for ourselves. But the 20 million credits, 20 million? Fucking hell, forget the credits, Larkin. If we can travel back in time, we can rule the galaxy. We will be the gods, rich beyond measure. Yes, but the whole premise seems impossible. If the Federation found a ship from the future, we already know it's possible. We just need to get our hands on the tech, one way or another. What makes you think that the Jari have it? Gorsh said that it's your people testing it. Richard said that there were some massive energy readings by the base. It's either a portal, a new drive, or a weapon. And if it's a weapon, that seems most likely to me. Then we use it with a bargaining chip. The energy readings were large enough for the agency to detect. Then it's a planet killer. They might be more amenable to sharing that tech with a bomb pointed at Earth. You would point an untested weapon at your own planet. Not my planet. I don't live there, do I? And neither do you, Larkin. So don't go getting all sentimental on me. I despised the idea of holding a human cradle world hostage, thief or not. I didn't gallivant about murdering civilians. Well, Nico wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. There was no way that he had any intentions of pulling the trigger either. Otherwise, I would never agree to it. I was merely an intimidation tactic to bring the Terran Union to the table. As dishonorable as those methods were, the potential rewards outweighed any moral qualms. I envisioned it in my head. An empire that stretched across the galaxy, brimming with untapped riches, loyal subjects who worshipped us, revering our names in song and prayer. The ability to weave the threads of history just like the true gods of the universe. How could anyone resist such a temptation? Oh, fine, I'm in, I sighed. The human clapped a hand on my back. That's the spirit. I knew I could count on you, Larkin. Let's go spring the Pisces and fulfill our destiny. Hell, leave that up to me. It seems that I already figured it out once, didn't I? And, what do we do with Gorsh? I asked. He's a loose end. Him? Nico smirked. Take him with us. We might find a way to make him useful yet. End of chapter. Jaffe point of view. The corpses strewn about the spaceport, mangled and bloodied, were a poignant reminder of human nature. Wherever a group of them clashed, such destruction was the end result. I was trying to conceal my personal feelings, but it was growing more difficult by the minute. While Terrans were not an outward enemy of the Federation, they were enemies of peace. That was reason enough to dislike them. As I finally slumbered on the flagship, the sights of the past 2 days plagued my dreams. Dead humans, petrified in ways I didn't think possible, floating in a space-borne tomb. Agony plastered on their ashen faces. I snapped awake, panting, none the more rested than when I closed my eyes. Why did fate pick Gorsh and I to find that ghost ship? As lawful as it was to say, a part of me felt that the humans' calamity was a merit of their own meddling. Tampering with the scientific fields that should never be touched was bound to end in disaster. If it weren't for Gorsh's selfless altruism, misdirected at a lot of savages, I would have left the Terrans to do their own devices. That was usually the best decision for all parties. But I wasn't the type of person to leave my best friend alone, squaring off with horrors beyond comprehension. After narrow escaping with our lives, I hoped that I could talk some sense into him. We'd sacrificed enough. It was time to return home. With the Pisces under Terran control, the crisis should be averted anyways. Gosh! I tapped a paw on the door to his quarters and lingered by the entryway. Can I come in? The only answer was silence, which earned an amused eye roll from me.
The poor guy was probably too deep in slumber to be roused. I decided to let him rest up and consult him later. I would just poke my head in to make sure that he was all right. Odd. There was nobody in his room, or any indicators to suggest that he'd been in there at all. No belongings, wrinkles in his sheets, or mud tracked in on the tile. Perhaps Gorsh had fallen asleep elsewhere on the ship. I should try and track him down before panicking. But after wandering about the ship for half an hour, my mind leapt to grim conclusions. My best friend was absent from the mess hall, the med bay, and the armory too. Come to think of it, the last person I saw him was with General Rykov. That particular human had a dark history, with a lot of blood on the entire species of his hands. He was infamous for discharging abominable weapons in combat. I warned Gorsh not to befriend that scumbag, but of course, he didn't listen. I found Rykov's interest in my best friend strange, and perhaps a bit concerning. There was no logical reason for an officer to sidle up to a patrolman. Gorsh thought that the Terran general was acting out of concern, but I believe that was a guise for his true motivation. If there were years of deceit where the Federation taught us anything, it was that humans were incredible actors. What if the humans had something nefarious in mind for Gorsh? Either way, threw him from being emotionally unfit, or worse, roped him into some sort of interrogation. Maybe Rykov wanted to grill the patrolman for information, out of desperation, to save his own hide. If I had evidence that the Terrans had done something unsavory, maybe the Federation soldiers would assist. No matter how much leverage the Terran Union had in the current Senate, they wouldn't want a kidnapping criminal at the helm of the galactic forces. My paws scrambled towards Rykov's office of their own volition. The pale human was poring at the bags beneath his eyes, studying a series of papers. So our prisoner says the spaceport was a smuggling outfit, specialized in weapons. He summarized aloud. The Kovian authorities had their pockets lined, quite unhandsomely. It's incredible that a truckload of human mercenaries didn't draw any attention from the locals. Barging into his office and demanding, "What did you do with my friend?" probably wasn't the best recourse. This required a diplomatic approach. Hopefully, the general's actions would give me some inkling to his knowledge. I knocked on the exterior wall and forced myself to salute in the human way. "What is it?" the general growled, an irritated glint in his eyes. "I don't think I'll be of help. Try General Blaise." "Pardon me, sir." I forced a casual smile on my face, noting how Rykov's posture went rigid as he recognized me. It was as though he knew what I said about humans, away from prying ears. Do you know where Gorsh is? I can't find him anywhere." "I sent him to rest. He should be in his quarters, as you should you," the human replied. "He's not there. I haven't seen him since he spoke to you," I wanted to say. "Since the end of the battle. Maybe he got lost. Our ship's designs aren't that straightforward as others in the Federation." "I looked all over the place. All of the usual suspects." "Well, I suppose you should keep looking, Joffy." "Please, sir. I'm begging for your help. If you care about Gorsh at all. He trusted you." "You really want a human's help? It must be serious then." Rykov tried to keep his expression impassive, but his knitted eyes betrayed his concern. I reminded myself with a hint of annoyance how skilled they were at faking emotions. "I'll send out a summons on the ship PA. Is that all?" "Anything you remember might help track him down, sir," I said carefully. "Where did you last see Gorsh?" "He wandered off as we were securing the Pisces. The big guy looked sleep-deprived as hell, so I figured he'd crashed on the ship." That's a start. Would it be okay if I assemble a Federation search party? I'd feel better if you sweep that area for signs of trouble." "There were soldiers everywhere. I don't see how anything could have gone unnoticed." The human ran a hand through his hair, revealing a few hints of grey in his outer lobe. "But very well. I'll get General Blaise to put together a search party and meet us in the hangar bay." "Us?" I echoed. "Yes, I'll help you look. Like you said, Gorsh is my friend too." I didn't want General Rykov to tag along and interfere with our investigation. What if he was coming to make sure that we didn't stumble across anything? This was the last opportunity to cover up any human misdeeds. But how could I say that without revealing my suspicions of Terran involvement? Thank you, sir," I sighed. The human dipped his head, slipping his navy jacket onto his shoulders. Grime was smeared on the shoulder cuffs from the battle, but the medals clipped to his chest still sparkled. The uniform made him appear regal and authoritative. As we sped down the ship's corridors, it was strange how the most dangerous species in the galaxy was so unassuming and noble to the eyes. Rykov stifled a yawn as we stopped by the Pisces, and my nerves grew unsettled. There was no sign of the Federation soldiers who were allegedly on their way. For a ship that was so tied up in interdimensional madness, I found it odd that no soldiers were posted around it. I didn't hear the Terrans order 2 sentries to keep watch at all times. Either someone was shirking their duties, or the General cleared out potential witnesses. As those thoughts crossed my mind, an exterior door swung open. A wiry human entered the hangar bay, clad in black military gear that was several sizes too large. He carried only an H pistol rather than the Terran standard-issue plasma rifle. Perhaps it was a preconceived notions, but the rascal didn't look the part of a trained killer. I mean, every few steps he was pushing his helmet off of his eyes. "Don't salute officers anymore, boy," Rykov hissed in a dangerously low tone. The scrawny figure pressed a hand to his head. Sorry, I zoned out." "Sorry, sir." The General's expression radiated suspicion, and his arm inched towards his hip. "Who are you? I don't recognize you."
I'm, Private Marino. I'm new, sir."
"Your name doesn't sound familiar at all. What were you doing out there, anyways?"
Having a smoke, sir," the man replied.
General Rykov drew his firearm in a heartbeat. "Bullcrap! Get on the ground!"
"What did I say?"
"Smoking has been prohibited in the military for a century, you daft fool. If you were doing it, you wouldn't tell me." Marino, if that was his real name, bolted towards the door. I didn't know what the involvement was, but he must know something about Gorsh's disappearance. We couldn't let him escape. Suddenly, I was glad to have Rykov present after all. The human soldiers were excellent at tracking targets and making snap decisions under duress. I was worried to see Rykov lining Marino up in his pistol, however. We needed the guy for questioning, not as a corpse or an autopsy. The General's finger depressed the trigger, and a loud crack split the air. The intruder stumbled with a yelp, clutching his leg. The plasma bolt through the kneecap wasn't lethal, but it did leave the target crippled. Marino fired a few wild shots in our direction, which missed their mark. I dropped to the floor, not wanting to risk a lucky hit. Rykov shrank back as well, barking several curses. His jam pistol left him unable to return fire. Surely the General would try and keep the intruder cornered until backup arrived. It was logical, risk-averse decision. Our opponent crawled behind a shipping crate, grunting in pain. General Rykov took a retreat as an invitation to charge, a clear sign of human derangement. If Marino reacted quick enough, the General could be taken out at point-blank range. My heart skipped a beat as Rykov scaled the crate, then lunged at his target from above. The aerial ambush caught Marino by surprise, and the gun slipped out of his grasp. The 2 Terrans rolled about from behind the container, locked in a frantic tussle. Rykov pinned the smaller guy and started to choke him out. The human, with its oxygen supply cut off, was like a fish out of water, flailing about. A desperate punch connected with the General's face, but his stranglehold didn't slacken. "What in the stars is going on?" a gravelly voice asked behind me. General Blaise entered the hangar bay, accompanied by 5 Federation soldiers. I could imagine the ill-tempered Jatari's bewilderment. It must appear like Rykov was asphyxiating one of his own soldiers, a young, weaker fellow at that. At the human's crazed expression, and one might assume that he had a nervous breakdown. "That guy's Marino. He's dressed up as a Terran soldier for some reason, but I don't think he is one," I answered. "He tried to flee when we caught him, and Rykov is trying to take him out." A flash of silver caught my eye, and Marino fished an object out of his pocket. Rykov didn't notice until the blade slashed against his cheek. The officer recoiled slightly, giving his opponent a chance to land a knee to the stomach. The Terran war criminal tumbled back, cupping his hand to his face. Bright red trickled between his fingers and rolled across his knuckles in rivulets. That wound must be deep enough to require stitches. General Blaise gestured to his team. The Federation soldiers rounded on Marino, hollering at him to drop his weapon. Surrounded and outnumbered, the human intruder released the knife. I was relieved to see him alive and in Federation custody. "Thanks, guys," Rykov panted, staggering to his feet. "Take this one to the brig." The General dropped a hand from his face, and a chill raced down my spine. The Federation soldiers gaped in open horror as the same realization dawned on them. Even General Blaise looked shaken. Rykov blinked in confusion. "Why are you all looking at me like that?" "The scar you have," I muttered, when they found you dead." The human traced a finger across his right cheek, eating the gaseous shape. His expression morphed into a deep frown. Touch revealed a familiar pattern, as well as any mirror. Perhaps, for all of our efforts, we hadn't altered the future at all. End of chapter. End of story. The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my video. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. I just quickly want to thank the Tier 5 patrons and channel members: Alithia Barkey, Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholtz, Albarden Guster, Arcadian, Lord Azrakal, and Joachim Backer.